Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. We have a special guest today, the president of Westmont College. He's a scholar. He's a warm, wise man, and I think you're going to really enjoy some of the insights he shares on leadership and life. Dr. Gayle Beebe is with us. The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I'm so glad you joined us today. GoodLifeTelevision.org is always the place you can see all the interviews from the last year plus, and we'd love to have you join us there. And so glad you joined us today, whether you're in Santa Barbara or somewhere else. We're just glad you're with us. I have a special guest today. The president of my alma mater, Dr. Gayle Beebe, is with me. Welcome.
Dean, great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
So I'll just give a little bit about your background. Just bachelor's degree from George Fox University, and then master's from Princeton Theological Seminary, Claremont Graduate University, and an MBA in strategic management from the Peter Druckers School at Claremont Graduate University. And you were at Spring Arbor University for 7 years as president before coming to Westmont, and that was in 2007 you came. So
yeah.
It's gone by quick, I guess.
Yeah, in our 14th year. It's
That's
just
amazing.
sped by. Hard to believe.
And man, so much has happened in the community and in the world in your tenure.
Yeah, it's been a very dynamic time. Some incredible highs, some real challenging lows.
Yeah. I wanted to go back just to start. Well, I want to talk a little bit about your upbringing. And the book, by the way, Dr. Beebe's most recent book is The Shaping of an Effective Leader. Highly recommend it. I spent my weekend on this last weekend and loved it. So
hey, thank
I'm going
you.
to be pulling a lot from that. But you came to Westmont 40 years ago.
I did.
For a semester.
Yeah.
While you were at George Fox.
That's right.
And you mentioned in the book that you had kind of an intellectual awakening.
Absolutely.
Talk about that.
You know, if I back up just 1 year into my junior year of college, my academic advisor, I was so excited about this book I was reading by a professor named Dr. Robert Gundry, and he quickly realized that he taught at Westmont. He said, look, we're part of the consortium. If you want, you could actually go next year and study with Dr. Gundry. And so he helped me make the application to come down to Westmont. And I came down wanting to study with Dr. Gundry. I took 3 other classes, of course, had New Testament theology with him. And it was just an amazing course. He was an amazing faculty member. He's still alive. He still comes to the library. He's still publishing. He's in his upper 80s. Walks. I mean, it's just amazing still to get to see him. And we have lunch a couple times each year, and I just still love seeing him. And what happened in that class was he showed a whole new level and approach to academic. And the academic rigor, he did everything to cultivate our love for God, but he also did everything to push us to maximize our God-given ability to think. And he taught me both how to have a warm heart and a keen mind. And it was just a beautiful awakening. And I think I was ready for it. I think there were some consolidating experiences that happened during my time at Westmont, but it just gave me the most incredible love for the college because I had such a transformational experience in that brief time I was here.
Yeah. I remember my memory of Dr. Gundry is I had New Testament with him, and we were in the big Porter Theater, and it was pouring rain one day, and everybody was distracted. And I just remember Dr. Gundry looking up and saying, Noah survived, and so will we. That's probably what I remember from the semester, actually. I was kind of a back row guy, but he what a great.
Well, here's what he did that stuck with me and influenced me when I was a professor. He literally would come into class, and you would be tested on your readings. You know, every class had a pop quiz, but he would get you to read the strongest persuasive argument on the left, the strongest persuasive argument on the right. And then his lecture would integrate the two, showing you the strengths and weaknesses of both as he came to his position. And he never forced his position on us, but he showed us how to think through opposing points of view. And it was just magical.
And that's something special about Westmont.
It is special about Westmont. I think we just still continue to strive to do that.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, for somebody who's watching this in Lincoln, Nebraska, who's never heard of Westmont College, as the president, What's your quick? How would
Well,
you?
I
How do
always
you
talk
introduce
about
Westmont?
the twin rails and the 5 planks. The twin rails, rigorous academics, deep love for God. We want you to do both. And then the 5 planks, the liberal arts curriculum. We want you to learn how to think. We want you to learn how to think across all the disciplines. Our Christian identity, we want you to grow in your life in Christ. That matters greatly to us. Undergraduate focus. 18 to 22-year-olds, they often think that this is just a period where you can kind of coast by. Meg Jay, in her book, The Defining Decade, talks about how critical the 20s are, that 7 of the 10 most important decisions we make are either made in our 20s or set up to be made in our 20s. The residential experience, that we want you to live on campus and learn how to live together with difference. We want you to learn that people have different points of view and how can you actually build society. Right now, the cultural moment, it's a very shrill tone, and we need to learn how to live with difference again. And then the global perspective. We want you to spend a semester traveling overseas with our faculty, and we not because they'll hover, but because they'll help interpret. And it's just proven that 15 weeks studying and traveling outside the United States with keen minds guiding you, you can have some of the most transformative experiences that shape your worldview for the rest of your life.
Wow. That's great. We have, as you know, we have a daughter up there right now.
Absolutely, I'm so glad Hannah's with us.
Yeah, and I think she's been talking about Egypt.
Okay, that's just a magical program.
Is
Jim
it?
and Heather, Jim Wright, Heather Keeney, a married couple, they met when Heather was teaching at American University of Cairo, and Jim is British. He
really?
had opened and operated an international law firm in Cairo. It's in Cairo now because it used to be in Istanbul, and Turkey became too volatile, and so we had to move it. But
wow,
it goes back and forth. They still spend 3 weeks in Turkey on the semester, but it's now based in Cairo because, believe it or not, Cairo is much safer than Istanbul at this point. At this point in time,
wow.
We hope someday. I've caught up to the program 3 times when it's in Istanbul. I totally love Istanbul. And caught up to it 1 time in Cairo, and so it's just a wonderful program.
That's good. That's neat. Let's tell me a little bit about your upbringing. I'm gonna pull a few things from your father.
Oh gosh, I
which
love
was
my
probably
dad.
my
I love
favorite
the
part.
memory of
My
that.
favorite part of the book.
Oh, thank you.
It was so rich to hear you talk about your dad as a mentor that
Absolutely.
happened to be your father. Talk about your upbringing, your family, kind of coming.
You know, my parents, both of them came out of the Quaker background. We were raised in a Quaker home. My parents, as early professionals in Eugene, Oregon, had graduated from George Fox themselves, come to the University of Oregon to get their graduate degrees. My mother would get a master's, my father a doctorate, and he was a public school superintendent. My mother was a public school first grade teacher. But the focus of our life was God, and if the church was open, we were there. They were one of 3 couples that helped start the church in 1951. We would grow up in it. My sister and her family still attend there, Eugene French Church on the west side of town. And so it was really very much the kind of the pivotal commitment of our family's life was God. And to live in my father's home, incredible energy, eternal optimist, great encourager, but if you were a child of his, you had to be at the breakfast table at 7, and you had to do family devotions every day. And if you had friends stay over Saturday night, they had to go to church with us.
Oh, really? That's good. That's a good rule.
We have so many funny memories of no matter where we were traveling. If it was Sunday, we had to go to church. My dad, I'm sure people would call him legalistic now, but we loved him. He always had our best interests at heart, and so we trusted him. And so we've seen the insides of a lot of churches we've never seen a kid, mostly because we'd be traveling somewhere and he'd want us in church.
Wow.
He always had a way of looking at what your felt need is, and so you had a sense of, even when he took a different position, you felt like you'd been heard, you'd been understood, even if he didn't fully agree with you. And then he was just emotionally present. I remember as a senior in high school, one of the schools in our league was called Marshfield High School. It was actually the high school of the famous runner Steve Prefontaine. It was down in Coos Bay. Tuesday night, our game, varsity game, started at 8 o'clock, and I looked up in the stands right behind the bench, 7:45. Here's my dad, who had gotten off work at 6, had driven almost 2 hours to Coos Bay, watched the game. I'm sure he didn't get home until midnight, got up and went to work the next day, but that's the way in which he was present to us. Two older brothers, a younger sister, and we all feel the same way about him.
Wow.
So,
yeah, I read that you talked about him being emotionally present, which in this day and age, in this era of distraction, and it's my phone buzzing, he said, you said you remember him telling you, and his name is Richard.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, be there.
That's right.
That's a great
And
thought.
he really wanted, because he was that way, he was emotionally present to you and you felt it. And you knew what it was like to feel his presence and just his encouragement. It was just masterful. My son is named for him. My dad died quite unexpectedly at age 60 back in 1989, so he's been gone a long time, but I think about him every day. I love having a son named after him.
Yeah,
and
that's so neat.
Getting to enjoy that.
That's neat. And you wrote about your father. He loved to see other people succeed.
Yeah.
He never felt threatened by the success of others, and he taught us to celebrate their success as well. What a great quality.
Absolutely. He just didn't live with envy. He was very thankful to the Lord for the life God had given him, and he just really believed God endowed each of us with gifts and abilities. That our responsibility as a leader is to maximize the God-given gifts and abilities of those under our care and influence, and he just exhibited that.
That's so neat.
Yeah.
You studied under Peter Drucker.
Oh, that was such a rich time.
I think he's called the father of modern management.
Father of modern management.
That's an amazing experience that you had.
It was.
I wrote down so much of your quoting him, and I want to just read a couple of them. One, an effective leader is not one who does things right. It is the one who does the right things. And then he said, focus on opportunities and innovations rather than problems. How is this translated? I mean, being a college president is a complex job, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I've heard. How is Drucker's influence translated into the way you lead?
I think, I hope this is what my executive team would say of me, that I give them wide latitude. I mean, I want them to feel that we're at the banks of the Mississippi River at its widest point, a mile wide. And on one side is the community life statement, on the other side is the statement of faith. As long as they don't head towards those banks or those sandbars, they have a ton of freedom. And you stay in the main channel, and I'm going to celebrate you. I'm going to get you all the resources you need, and we are going to have a great run together. If you start to move towards the banks, if you start to run aground, then we'll have challenges. And I like to give a lot of autonomy. I mean, we agree on goals, and this is what I learned from Drucker, is that you've got to agree on goals, but you've got to let people work within the framework of their own personality, because work is meant to bring fulfillment. And if you're hovering, if you're too overbearing, you're going to have people who actually could perform better, but are demotivated by the way in which you supervise them. Drucker said, we've really never figured out how to motivate people, but we've figured out several effective ways to demotivate people.
Right.
And I think also, having been a competitive athlete, I knew what kind of coaches I liked, what kind I didn't like. And I liked coaches who said, here's the goal, here's how we're going to prepare to achieve the goal. And then they didn't make me become like them. They tried to make me the best version of me that they could.
Yeah.
And I remember I playing baseball, and I was playing American Legion after my senior year of high school. And this was the best hitting coach I ever had. And he didn't try to change my swing. He tried to get my swing to be the most effective version it could be. And I just thought, I've always thought of that. Like, golfing now in adulthood, I've taken a couple lessons. Both times I've had a golf coach work with me, they always try to break down my swing. And I keep thinking back to my hitting coach in American Legion who said, I don't want your swing to look like mine. I want it to be the best version of your swing. And I think that that's also a subtle way in which a leader can help unleash the creative capacities of their team.
That's so great. I didn't know you were a baseball player.
Yeah, I was a catcher through college.
Were you really?
I was.
At George Fox?
At George Fox. Yeah.
Wow. I tried to play at Westmont.
Lindsey Parton, who's a class of 75 alum, he was a catcher here. And so we have wonderful stories talking about being being catchers. So
The most thankless.
It
job
is,
on
but
the
you're in
field.
on every play.
That's right.
If you're hyperactive and you like being over involved, it's the perfect position.
Right. You're not standing around. Yeah. Gosh, there's so much about on the leadership side, but we have limited time. Let's talk about the world today, because obviously it's been a really tough year, and it's not getting any better probably for the foreseeable future.
Right.
You wrote in here, every downturn eventually has an upturn if we persevere with hope.
Yeah.
What message could you give, or do you give, to your team, your family, your friends about being in dark times? I mean, obviously you've dealt with a lot at Westmont. The fire burned down 8 buildings on campus. You've had, a fair amount of things just in this community, but just on a more global level, this is a tough time, and that's such a hopeful thought. Talk about that.
Well, I totally believe, my faith in Christ is the most important thing to me. I think when you have a shaping value like that it just is what sustains you. And I'd like to go back to my father's death, because it's preceded 7 years earlier by the death of one of my favorite mentors who was killed quite tragically in an accident on Mount Hood. That was 1982. I just started my first year at Princeton Seminary. And I went to see my philosophy of religion professor, Diogenes Allen. And I had just met him, and I was devastated. And he had just written a book called Traces of God in a Frequently Hostile World. And it's about the problem of evil and suffering. And he helped me work through, from a philosophical and spiritual standpoint, the problem of evil and suffering. Fast forward 7 years, my dad dies. It was emotionally devastating to me, but it was completely disorienting for my mother and my sister. But I had worked through the problem of evil and suffering 7 years earlier, and I was then able to be emotionally present to my mother and sister in ways that really mattered to them. And then you keep going through in life, and I think each challenge, each crucible experience, if you will do the work to understand what spiritual lesson you need to learn from it, it prepares you for things coming that you don't even know. Like learning how to persevere in the face of adversity, not knowing when it will end. That has become so valuable during my time at Westmont, because we've had so many things to overcome. And you come to our current moment, you've got to be adaptable. You have got to take the input that's saying things have got to change. What are the things that are moving in society? What are the ways in which they fit within the framework of Westmont? And then how do we create the groundswell that will permit that to happen? Part of what we're doing right now, I mean, we have both the COVID-19 response and the racial conversation response. And so we're working from the board at every level of the college, doing readings, bringing in special speakers, doing special focus. Even today, Fridays, Carmel Saad, our social psychology prof, is doing a series on implicit bias and helping us understand the problems of implicit bias, the fact that every one of us has prejudice. And if you actually deal with the issue of implicit bias, it's the lowest threshold way to get at the fact that we all have prejudice. Well, once you start there, you can begin working on it. But the work that we've got to do right now is we have, as part of our discipline in following Christ, we have got to come to terms with the cultural moment, and not just from an individual standpoint or not just from a social standpoint, but both have to go hand in hand. We have to change, and we have to be a part of the change that our society needs in ways that are hopeful. And again, there's a number of cross currents moving right now. We have to continue to work with hope. We have to call out, the best of us, not the worst of us. One of the many books I'm reading, a book that I'm right in the middle of, Neither Jew nor Greek, Neither Jew nor Gentile by George Yancey. He's a black professor at Baylor University. It's just a wonderful book about how do you build communities that are hospitable to racially mixed groups at Protestant colleges and universities. It's incredibly well researched, well documented. But he says you've got to do three things. You've got to hire more persons of color on your faculty. You have to offer more classes that are relevant to multiple ethnic groups. And you have to have student-run multicultural programs. But he said the key, and I love this, he said it does matter how they approach their work. And the faculty, the persons of color who are your faculty, have to be able to address the issues without alienating majority culture kids. And that's what I think is the element that we've got to, the special sauce we've got to be able to bring to it at Westmont is, how do we have difficult conversations but still keep everybody in the conversation?
Right. That's great. And what's the name of the author?
George Yancey, and it's
George
called
Yancey.
Neither Jew Nor Gentile.
That's great.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book.
You mentioned, I mean, we were talking about suffering, and you were saying, what's the spiritual lesson for me at this moment? That's such a great thought. And I find it interesting. So character, in this book, which you should get, the foundation of the pyramid is character.
Yeah.
And I've always thought it was interesting in the scripture, if somebody were to say, how do you develop character? Before, I've suffered a fair amount, some of it self-inflicted and some of it not. But before I would have said, well, you try to be better. But then I always think about the scripture where actually character stems from perseverance, which stems from suffering and yields hope.
Yeah.
Which I think is such a powerful thing, that if we persevere in the suffering, it actually builds character.
Absolutely.
Talk about character as the foundation. We're not going to be able to get to all 8 of your C's.
Well, here's what I had actually, when everything kind of started to fall in place, this was when I'd been thinking about a lot of things that are in the book, but I was in this pivotal moment where I was listening to a person lecture, and he was extolling the virtues of character, that everything rises and falls on character. I literally found myself nodding quietly and then suddenly stopping. And I stopped here's the thought that crossed my mind. The person saying this has ruined one organization and is on the way to ruining a second one. And that's literally when I thought, okay, it is character, but it's got to be more. And it was right then that I thought about how much competence matters. And that character is the foundation, and if that creates cracks, you're going to have trouble. But you've got to do more than just be good, be a good person. You've got to be capable. And so competence and character really work in tandem. And so the pyramid is just built on those two, as really how do they develop. And I think when I talk about vision, I talk about vision has to always exceed the inconvenience. And if you find yourself as a leader beginning to get more annoyed, more preoccupied with the inconvenience of the job, any job I've ever done that had leadership responsibilities had enormous inconvenience built into it. But the vision was always bigger, is always bigger. Like, I think about what I have the privilege of doing every day at Westmont. I am so motivated by it, and the vision so exceeds the inconvenience of the job. You want to be in positions like that. But the inconvenience is where your character is formed, and it is formed in the hiddenness. There's this wonderful poem by George Herbert that I talk about in my book, Longing for God. And it's based on Colossians 3:3. Our life is hid with Christ, who is our treasure. And he wrote it about the double motion of the sun, that the sun appears to rise in the east, set in the west, because of the rotation of planets. And even though we see one orbit, the sun is also rotating on its axis, and that's the hidden axis. And if you think about it, that's very much like our life. That there is a life. I can tell you when I was born, how old I am, when I got married, how we celebrate our anniversaries, my kids' birthdays. There's a chronological order. Well, there's a hidden life going on at the same time that there's a chronological life, and that character formation is the hidden life. What are the experiences of life, and what have you learned from them, and how does that help you today?
And it's amazing how in some of the dark valleys, I think, some of the greatest lessons.
Oh my goodness. I remember my dad had a massive heart attack. He'd aspirated food into his lungs. They'd done CPR, and they killed his brain, and we would eventually have to take him off life support. I was pastoring. Pam and I were recently married, and I remember returning to my congregation to be with them, to be up front but not to preach that Sunday. I remember looking out, and I looked at the congregation differently. I remember looking to the back, and I knew this couple was estranged from their son, and I thought how painful it would be if I was estranged from my father. And that's what I think happens to us is
Tenderness.
absolutely, it makes you more tender. If you will engage your suffering,
Yeah.
it will make you a more empathetic person,
Yeah.
and you will connect with people at a level that you never had.
That's so powerful. Awesome.
And that's what I look for. And I know that God, if I dispose my will to God, God will actually shape me. And it's in that shaping, that transformational process, that you become better able to hear what people are saying to you.
Yeah. We had a brain injured child 18 years ago, and I remember thinking at the time, I mean, obviously, this is like a bomb dropped on your family.
Yeah.
And I always think now, we wouldn't trade this experience. I can't imagine what our family would be like without, and
Absolutely.
so much has happened along the way that, but sometimes I think you don't see it till later.
Well, Dean, and it's hard. I mean, it's just hard to get through it because you have fluctuating, you have dreams and ambitions for your children, and that would just be devastating.
Yeah.
One of the things that I learned from Dr. Allen when I was dealing with the death of this pivotal mentor was part of what he deals with in Traces of God in a Frequently Hostile World is all of us have experiences of suffering. Part of the difference is how you respond to them. And the only thing that we can control in an event of suffering or setback is our response to them. And I actually have carried that with me as I've gone through a variety of setbacks is the only thing I can control is the energy I bring to my response and my attitude.
Yeah, that's a quote from your dad too.
That is attitude and effort, and
right.
I love that the only two things you can control are attitude and effort, and that was just very much him.
The pyramid. I'll just read them real quick because we're not going to be able to talk about it anymore. But character, competence, chemistry, culture, compatibility, convictions, connections, and commitment. And then you talk about how in the end there's an ultimate contribution.
Yeah.
It's such a wonderful thing. We're out of time, but I wanted to hopefully finish with one last.
You bet.
I'm going to have to choose here, but I think I know what it is. This program's called Good Life, and I know you spent a lot of time with Dallas Willard. And he.
Oh, gosh, yes. What amazing.
What a man. This gentle powerhouse. This kind. I just was amazed, and my parents got to be friends with his a little bit, but he talked about the good life, and he talked about what is everybody's looking for the good life,
right? And
this program's not called Good Life because of fancy cars or shiny objects. It's real. What we talked about today. It can mean suffering. It can mean. Yeah. But he talked about when he was asked the question, "What is the good life?" He said, "Anyone alive in God's kingdom," which he defines God's kingdom as with godness, or this. Could you talk about what your reflections on true good life, just at this stage in your?
Well, can I throw in a story about Dallas?
Please.
Because he was such a dear man, and so I had the privilege of being one of the general editors on the Renovari Study Bible, and this gave me an opportunity to be. Richard was my avenue in, Richard Foster, and he was my college professor, and he also pastored the church, the Friends Church that I attended during college. And so Richard and I had been teaching together at Azusa, and then he wanted to do this project, invited me to be a part of it. So what turned out to be a 5-year project, supposed to be 2 years, every 3 months, all of us would fly to Denver Airport and stay at the Denver Airport Marriott from Friday afternoon through Sunday, and we would work on the study Bible.
Wow.
And so and it gave me 5 years with Dallas. Oh. And you would walk out of these meetings, and my father was incredibly warm, but he rarely touched people.
Oh, really?
And so Dallas had this way of, he'd come up right alongside you and he would actually hold your arm. And it took me a couple times to get used to that. And then he would ask me the most probing question about how I was doing, how was the presidency going. And he was one who you felt his entire presence when he was there. You. And so how do I define the good life? This is my life purpose statement: to maximize the God-given gifts and abilities of those under my care and influence for the greater good of the kingdom of God and for rich blessings in their own life. And that very much embodies my understanding of how Dallas has defined the good life.
So good. I wish we had more time. Maybe we could do this again sometime.
I'd love to do it.
We got that on camera.
This is just a blast.
He's willing to do it again.
So,
Thank you for coming.
well, thank you for those
much.
wonderful questions. Honestly, you just make this so enjoyable.
Oh,
and
thank you.
Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. Beebe. And we'll see you next time.